Hi, this is Toby, and today we'll be discussing about soil to use for your cacti. When repotting a cactus, soil is a big factor that comes into play. As mentioned before, if your cacti was not in a good soil mix, that could be one of the reasons you want to repot it. Now, there is no magical mix or magical formula that works for every single cacti. The composition of your soil would depend on where you live, so your climate and the species of cacti. Generally with soils, you would have a base compost, and in here, this is a pre-made cacti and succulent mix that I have purchased. It's just an Osmocote. You can buy them, and if you're a beginner and you're starting up the hobby and you don't have any other materials, simply using this for your cacti is good enough, considering you probably will not be accessing very hard to grow species. You might have a few gymnoclysseums or a few echinopsis, and just a store-made cacti and succulent mix will be good for your purpose. It drains faster than most other soils that you can get from the store. It's going to drain faster than your compost, your peat-based compost. But if you want to grow cacti and succulents in the long term, you need to consider the soil you're using. For the purpose of this video's discussion, we'll be referring to repotting desert cacti. We will not be talking about tropical cacti such as epiphyllums and Schlumbergera, which are epiphytes as well. If we were repotting epiphytes, this mixture is what I use for my epiphytes. I don't add anything. I just use a store-bought cacti and succulent mix because it has sufficient drainage, and since they require a bit more water, you don't want the water to drain out too much. But we are talking about desert cacti for this video, so I'll be talking about what soil I use for my plants. Mixing your soil is good because you know exactly what you're putting in the soil and the ratio that is going in. So with the ingredients here, I just have 3 ingredients that I use. This is just a new mixture I started using this year, and every year, you can use a soil and see how your plant reacts. So if it's good, you can keep the formula. If not, you can change it. And sometimes what you use can also be dependent on what you can buy. So here I have sand. You all know what sand is. I have perlite, this extremely light volcanic rock that is fired to really high temperatures, and you can see it's very light. If you buy them in big packets and you lift it, you know it's light. I'll show you what it looks like. It's white, it floats on water, and if it's windy it'll blow away, so that's how light it is. And here I have pumice, another volcanic rock which has holes in it for aeration. Also a very light substance, if you can see, similar to perlite but a bit different. Now, if you do not have access to most materials, all you can just use is just perlite. This is cheap, this is not very expensive, and very accessible and affordable. So is sand. So if you're just a beginner, you could just add sand and perlite. And I don't want to go too much of a complicated soil, so that's why I'm only using 3 ingredients and the base compost. You can make your own base compost if you want, just from compost, and adding just a bit of cacti and succulent fertilizer. Fertilizer just for cacti and succulents. In the pre-made cacti and succulent mix that I purchased, you can see there are already pellets like these that are in there. So I don't need to add extra fertilizer. I never fertilize any of my cacti, and they flower great for me. So again, if you're a beginner using this, there is nothing wrong with using this. When I first started out, I used this, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we're going to be talking about how to make a more complex soil. So in here, the amount of base or compost in here is equal to 3 of these pots. So half of it's going to be this base compost, and the other half is going to be our other substances. Another thing to consider before using soil in your cacti is the pH of the soil. You can just buy a cheap pH meter like that tests the acidity of the soil, and generally you want it to be on 7, which is, I can show you guys, that's 7. If it's slightly above or below, doesn't matter. As long as it doesn't reach around 6 or 8, you should be fine. So with the soil, we're going to add our perlite, 1 part perlite in there, and you can see it's very dusty, so careful not to get that in your lungs. Our sand, and our pumice. Now what we do is we give it a good mix so that all of the components are combined equally. Now before I had pumice, I would use grit, which is something I also use for my top dressing, and I have it here. I do not have a lot left. This is all the grit I have left. It's just big, it's like large sand particles, and it looks really good for top dressing. You can get them slightly lighter colors, slightly redder, it doesn't matter. Or you can use pumice as a top dressing if you want. So we're going to continue to mix our soil, and what a lot of people do when bulk making soils is that they boil it or they heat to temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius just so it kills off any possible fungus spores in there or microorganisms that could potentially harm your cacti. And I should probably be doing that a lot more often, but I don't. We can see that the soil is combined, and you can see all the components in there: the perlite, the pumice, the sand, and the original compost. And you can see straight off the bat, it doesn't look like some soil you just get for your plants if you're growing tomatoes or vegetables. This isn't the soil that looks like that. It's extremely aerated. You can see a lot of minerals, very coarse. And if I just put my pH meter in there, you can see it's 7. So we don't have to worry about it damaging the roots. And also, one of the key factors of this is good drainage, and that is a very important factor. Now, you don't have to use my recipe. Again, the recipe will differ depending on where you come from, but one of the key important factors you need to consider is drainage, and I'll show you how quickly this soil drains. Now here's a little pot where you would usually plant your cacti in. It's a very good sized pot, and I'll be showing you how quickly this drains. So here is water. When I pour it in, you can see and immediately the water drains out. If you can see, I'll pour it in again just to emphasize what I'm saying. We'll pour water to the brink, and look at how fast it drains. Water just seeps out, and this shows it doesn't hold any excess moisture, but the pumice that I put in there will absorb a bit of the water, so that when the cacti needs it, the roots will be able to absorb the water from the pumice. And if I left it in full sun for around 2 or 3 days, it should be able to dry out all the way to the bottom, especially when the plant is also absorbing the water. So this is a good soil mix. You can make your own with any recipe as long as it drains well. And you can see with all my cacti, I don't really have any problems with rot after I use good soil. They're perfectly healthy. I barely had anything rotting. So I hope you enjoyed this quick look about cacti soils. I know some people commented, can you do a video on soils? So here it is. This is just a good mix that I came up with, and I'll start using now. So you can see all mixed throughout. You can see it's a very well draining and well aerated soil for a cacti. Now you could grow other plants in it. Nothing's going to stop you from doing that, but just remember that this will drain very quickly and is more suited to cacti and succulents. I'm not saying cacti and succulents will only grow in this soil. If you just use compost, it will grow, but in the long term, it will be more susceptible to rot as the drainage isn't as good and there isn't as much air going to the roots as well. So I hope you enjoyed this quick video on soil, and if you have any questions, comment them in the comment section below and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And stay tuned for the next video, which I'll be showing you about choosing pots, and I'll also make a video about repotting cacti.